Chapter 2. The Road. Thomas had always known that the mountains weren't enough for him. They were his home, sure. He'd been raised in their arms, running their hills, breathing in their thick, pine-scented air. He loved them, like you love a hard and bitter father, knowing full well they didn't love you back. Life in the Hollars wasn't kind. Farming was damn near impossible unless you had a good flat patch of land, and most folks didn't. You either grew just enough to scrape by or found yourself owing more than you had to give. The lucky ones hunted, fished, and patched together whatever they could, their lives measured in seasons and survival. The unlucky ones just withered, waiting for a break that never came. Thomas knew early on he wasn't built for that kind of waiting. He had a knack for fixing things, a way of seeing how they worked just by looking at them. It had started when he was a boy, tinkering with rusted-out lawnmower engines in his uncle's shed, then moving on to his dad's busted truck. He'd never forget that day on the roadside, the truck coughing its last breath in the middle of a scorching summer afternoon. With nothing but some hemp rope and a camper's knot, he rigged up a makeshift fan belt good enough to get them down the mountain to Junior S. garage. His old man had given him a look that day. Not pride exactly, but something close to it, maybe even a little respect. After that, people started bringing him their broken things. Tractors, chainsaws, even the occasional old clock radio. If it had moving parts, Thomas could figure it out. Not that it made him any money. People around here didn't have much to give, and if they did, they sure as hell weren't spending it on fixing things they could do without. But it gave him something better than cash, a purpose. But Thomas had another talent, one he kept mostly to himself. At night, when the work was done and the stars glowed dim behind the haze of wood smoke, he'd sit in his room with a dog-eared notebook and a couple of stubby pencils drawing the things that lived in his head. He never sketched the real world. He didn't see the point. His mind was a movie reel of strange and twisted things, and he poured them onto the paper like dark confessions. Skulls with jagged teeth, demonic unicorns with hollow eyes, shadows creeping from behind trees, their fingers too long, their faces stretched and empty. He never showed them to anyone. By the time he turned 18, Thomas had grown into something that looked more like a man than a boy. He stood 6'2", 240 pounds of solid, grease-streaked muscle, his fingernails stained black from years of working on busted engines. His jeans were torn at the knees, his boots scuffed to hell, and his favorite AC/DC shirt was so faded it barely had a logo left. A leather jacket worn soft from years of wear hung heavy on his shoulders. It was 1987, and Thomas looked like 1987. The car he drove wasn't much, but it was his. A Frankenstein of metal and rust, cobbled together from the wrecks his uncles had left to rot in the backfield. It wasn't pretty. Hell, it wasn't even safe. But it had 4 wheels, a roaring engine, and enough steel to make you feel like you could punch through a brick wall at 80 miles an hour. The brakes were questionable at best, and the suspension groaned like a dying animal every time he took a curve too hard. But it was fast, and fast was all he cared about. And now fast was exactly what he needed. The call-the-wall phone rang sometime past noon, its rattling buzz cutting through the quiet hum of a slow summer day. Thomas leaned back in the kitchen chair, twisting the cord around his fingers. "Yeah? Happy birthday, you greasy bastard." The voice on the other end was familiar. Davy, his best friend since they were kids, the only person he'd ever known who could match him step for step when it came to doing dumb shit just for the hell of it. Davy had left the mountains a year ago, moving down to Hickory with his folks. Now he had a job, a car that didn't look like a death trap, and apparently plans. "You still breathing up there, man?" Davy asked. "Yeah, barely." "What's up?" "It's your birthday, dumbass. You need to get your ass down here." Thomas smirked. "Why?" "Because I said so, and because I got a couple of girls you'd like to meet, and because we found a place where all the teens hang out, and it's going to be wild. So quit playing with your wrenches and hit the road." Thomas glanced out the window, watching the trees sway in the afternoon light. The mountains had been his whole world, but now they felt smaller. He'd always known he'd leave someday, just not when. Maybe today was the day. "You know I can make that trip in 30 minutes, Thomas said. "This old heap still runs." Davy laughed. "You ever fix the brakes?" "Nope," Thomas admitted. "But I tightened the springs." She corners better than Petty on a dirt track. A pause. Then, man, you're crazy. Nah, Thomas said, a grin creeping over his face. I just haven't found anything to be scared of yet. But even as he said it, something crawled up his spine, cold and slow. A whisper in the back of his mind. He ignored it. All right, he said, pushing back his chair. Don't let the beer get warm. I'll be there before sundown. Good. And for the love of God, fix one of your damn headlights. Thomas laughed, grabbed his keys, and headed out the door. As the engine roared to life, he didn't look back at the tree line, didn't let his thoughts wander too far into the dark, because he was leaving the mountains, and whatever was out there, whatever had watched him all those years ago, it could stay in the hollars where it belonged. Couldn't it?